Good evening and welcome to the February 1st Millis School Committee meeting. We are in the middle school, high school library. The meeting is being recorded and can be viewed on Mondays at 7 p.m. on Comcast Channel 8 or Verizon Channel 37. All meeting videos are also posted on the Millis Public Schools website under School Committee. All videos are also available on YouTube, and all times are also approximate. Judy, has anyone signed in for open session?
No, I have.
Okay, so we're going to start with a roll call. Miss Briggs, that's me, I'm here. Mr. Conroy?
Here.
Mr. Catalano?
Here.
Miss Gibbons?
Here.
Miss Roach?
Here.
And our teacher rep, Miss Coppies?
Here.
Here. I don't see any student reps tonight. And Superintendent Whiting?
Here.
All right. Start with our action items. Consideration to approve the school committee meeting minutes from the 18th of January.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Catalano?
I make a motion to consider the January 18th, 2022 school committee meeting minutes. Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries unanimously. Consideration to approve PO 10183 to Prime Time Sports.
These are for football jerseys and pants, I think, as well, that we would have been planning to purchase next year. The revolving fund, which will fund these, so it won't impact the budget, is frankly in very good shape, so we decided to take advantage of that and purchase them now.
Okay.
Madam Chair,
Ms. Roach.
I make a motion to approve PO 10183 in the amount of $6,170 to Primetime Sports.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries unanimously. Consideration to purchase up to 2 vehicles not to exceed $70,000 for special education students.
So the good news is, we believe we have the money to potentially purchase 2 vans. Our intention was to try and purchase flex fuel vans, if not electric vans or vehicles. And again, that's the good news. The bad news is right now, every time I turn around, the vehicle I want to purchase is not available until next fall.
Yeah.
So what I really need here is, and I would appreciate your trust, is some flexibility for us to have an approval amount that we could have an up to, in this case, $70,000 for up to 2 vehicles, that if we can find them, that we could go out and purchase them. At a minimum, they would be conventional vans of the highest miles per gallon energy efficiency that we could find. At a maximum, they'd be electric vehicles. Okay? So that's sort of our range that we're looking at. Unfortunately, and I think I put the addendum as I was writing this, I got a call from one of our vendors on the state contract list who said, you know, it looked like for a period of time Ford and GM were going to shut down van production. So, I mean, yeah. So it's right now kind of dicey as to exactly what we're looking at for vehicles, which is why I worded it that way. Sandy and I are kind of looking at it and saying, okay, well, could we do something with an electric car, basically? And the thought process is to have a couple in the fleet are workable. We couldn't do the whole fleet that way, but we have a number of routes that we run 1 student or 2 students on. Those vehicles would work. You know, electric car would work in those situations. We'd still need a number of vans, but to put a couple of electric cars in the fleet would be workable. Those might become available. So, hence why I need some flexibility both in the up to dollar limit, but also in the type of vehicle we may end up purchasing.
So, Mr. Wiggins,
Yes.
is the 70 enough? Meaning if somehow you go tomorrow, 2 electric vehicles are available, is 35 per vehicle enough?
We believe that it is. Would I like to have more? Sure. Do I think that I could safely ask for more at this moment in time? Not really. I think I have to work with a $70,000 budget right now.
Okay, that's fair to me. And as much as I support and endorse the greening of our fleet, or the starting of the greening of our fleet, reliable transportation.
Right.
Because I suspect that there are bills from our mechanic in there.
Oh, I suspect so too.
So, as much as I want to start this process with supply chain issues, I also don't want to hold up securing, because we lost a little bit of time in rotating new vans in,
Right.
so I support this. But I think we need to get whatever we can do right now and think about the long-range plan, and hopefully the bottleneck will open up and we can start to green the fleet.
Right, and just so everybody knows, I think we have two vans right now that are in the 140,000 plus range, if I remember correctly. They're on the inventory that you have, I think I've highlighted them. Those would be the two we'd replace, and then the next two highest mileage vans we have would then rotate into the spare.
So
work.
all the more reason to buy
Yep.
these if we vote yes, which I think we will,
Okay,
to get as quick as possible.
Yep.
Unless something happens tomorrow and
yep,
the electric vans are there.
yep, okay, understood.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Catalano.
I make a motion that the Millis School Committee authorize the purchase of up to 2 vehicles for special education transportation in an amount not to exceed $70,000, with funds coming from designated earmark and transportation revolving funds.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Okay. Consideration of integrity contract?
Yeah, this is basically our contract for the internet. And this is actually a good thing. Because of some changes in how E-rate is functioning now, under some new rules, we're actually going to be able to save not a lot of money, but a little bit of money on our internet access. That's always good, anytime we can save any kind of money. So it's something that we have, and this has gone out to bid. This is the same contractor we have been using. We've been happy with their service and their response time when we do have a problem. So we don't have any issue with the vendor or the contract.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Conroy.
I make a motion to approve the integrity contract 5096 in the amount of $10,872.
Second. It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank
Motion
you.
carries.
Thank you.
All right, I don't see our student rep, but our teacher rep. If you want to come up to the microphones.
Good evening.
Hi.
So, Clyde Brown has announced that they will be exchanging Valentines as a token of friendship and community, but they would like to remind everybody that they want no food attached to the Valentines. So, no Girl Scout cookies, I guess. The students are doing a great job at Clyde Brown of following the core values of taking care of themselves, taking care of others, and taking care of the environment. So on Friday, they kicked off a celebration congratulation event with a school-wide pajama day. So if your kids went into Clyde Brown, I imagine they had a comfy day on Friday. At the middle school, Mia Young is this year's Project 351 Millis Middle School ambassador. So she's joined a fleet of ambassadors across the state. Her service project will be focused on the social issues of equity, inclusion, and racial justice. And Mia says that she's really grateful for the experience, and she thinks it's going to be a great way to gain some leadership experience and help her community. The middle school just had their midpoint of trimester 2, and progress reports were sent out. A new wind block schedule has kicked in this week. And the grade 7 Huddle Award winners for motivational skills are Franco Barasano, Phoebe Allen, April Cartmel, Matt Curley, Ava Bracchio, Nora Doherty. The 6th graders would like to welcome another student teacher into Ms. Sicardo's English class. So they've got Mr. Benjamin Herman, who will be working with them, who joins, I believe Ms. Shockley also has a student teacher, if I'm not mistaken. And we've got some windows into social studies classes this week. So the 8th graders have been working on a project of understanding the U.S. Constitution, as well as what their students' beliefs are telling them about what is missing or what doesn't belong. So they've been sort of reorganizing the amendments and justifying which ones are there or which ones need to be added in. And in grade 7, they're working on a class book on Australia, and so they've been writing pages to build their book with. All right, at the high school, we just finished term 2 and semester 1, and report cards went home yesterday. The school counseling office is going to be offering a virtual junior college planning night on Thursday, February 10th, which is next week. It's starting at 6:30 p.m. And there'll be representatives from Boston College, Suffolk University, UMass Amherst, and Mass Bay Community College as well. The Zoom link is available from the counseling office. Miss Ziemba's AP government class transformed into a Senate chamber last week, and they were debating the Freedom to Vote Act while learning the rules of parliamentary procedure. Mr. Bigelow's AP Hug class, his human geography class, had their annual Rosto Cup competition, and this year's winners were Sophia Rubalcaba and Izzy Doherty. The students competed against one another, pinning countries that they were assigned according to Rosto's sort of rules of organization. And in Mr. Cravy's classes, they've been exploring George Orwell's 1984, which is, of course, always a classic. The library got a grant from the Norfolk County Teachers Association, and if you look behind you on the wall, you can see that they've organized their novels, not their graphic organizers. They've been able to include purchase of posters, bookmarks, wall decorations, and sort of bring the graphic novel collection to the forefront. As you all know, the high school is partnered with the JED Foundation, and they're looking to put together a parent focus group for February 16th. So if there are people out there who are interested in joining that focus group, they can reach out to Mr. Odicki or any of the counselors. The CPAC has got their IEP and 504 planning session on February 8th. You can find that information on the school website. That's what I have for tonight.
Thank
you.
you.
Have a good one.
Thank you so much.
I think I can just go into the ethics for unmasking.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't know if there's a report you wanted to do from the time of
You know what, that might not be a bad idea to do that. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge the work of the town DPW over the weekend, get the roads and sidewalks clear, allows us to open on Monday on time. Our custodial maintenance staff worked hard all weekend, got the buildings in great shape. Our bus drivers and van drivers went to the yard on Sunday and got the buses all ready to go. So I was out in front of the school, and by 8:02 in the morning, it was all clear and everyone was in the school. So it was really nice. So I'll take if we're going to have a blizzard, let's have them on Saturdays. The town crews really did a great job. So I'd like to acknowledge that. For Time on Learning, I just wanted to give you an update on the literacy program review. You may recall earlier this school year, Ms. Django came and did a school improvement plan and mentioned what they were going to be doing with literacy. We're looking for a core literacy program to implement at Clyde Brown. So with the help of the Hill Group, the staff over at Clyde Brown started by examining 7 core literacy programs, and they've now narrowed the field to 3. Amplified Core Knowledge Language Arts, also known as CKLA, Houghton Mifflin Harcourt Into Reading, and a bundle program with products from Great Minds, Wit and Wisdom, Haggerty Phonemic Awareness, and Wilson Language Training Foundations. They're also looking at compatibility with the Spanish immersion. That unique program makes it a little more challenging to pick a school-wide program, or a program for the lower elementary, the higher elementary. But they'll be doing the work to make sure that the Spanish immersion program is a part of the core literacy improvements we're making. We have applied for a grant from the state, the Accelerating Literacy Learning with High-Quality Instructional Materials. And we've requested in that grant approximately $120,000 to help with the materials, the training, professional development this year and next. And the grant is good for this year, and we meet a lot of the prerequisites, so we're really hopeful. We should be hearing shortly about that. And that $120,000 would go a long way towards purchasing these core materials for us. If we don't get the grant or we don't get the full amount, we're going to need some support to do it, so we may be coming back to the table. But we're pretty confident when we looked at the criteria for the grant. You know, it's not always the case that we fit the bill as a small school in our area, but this one seems like it was teed up right for us. So hopefully we'll be getting good news on that. So the staff at Clyde Brown is working very hard to select the program that will be best for all students.
The metrics for unmasking. Chat a little bit about
Sure, yeah.
COVID
So
stuff?
the updated numbers, which were kind of a late addition to the memo. As of today, over at Clyde Brown, now that students can get vaccinated, counting students and teachers, approximately 56% of the individuals at Clyde Brown are vaccinated, and of the classes that are open to vaccination, kindergarten through 5, pre-K kids are not eligible. All of those classes are over 50% vaccinated. So a lot of people have had their students get the shot since it became available. The middle high school, now that 6th grade is eligible, currently we have about 61% of the 6th graders have both shots. We have 59 students in the 6th grade who have had at least one shot. Once we get to 57 kids there, this whole building, 6 to 12, would be at that 80% threshold where we could apply to the state for an exemption to the mask mandate. So that's where we're at with vaccinations. The other COVID news is we have the the opt-in program for at-home testing. Staff got their tests last week and they were distributed, and we just got the shipment of student tests this evening, so they'll be going out to the various school offices, and the students whose parents opted them in will be getting those tests this week. Distribution is going to be on Thursday, and once those tests are distributed next week, we will not be doing contact tracing or test and stay now that we're part of this program, and the nurses can focus on symptomatic testing rather than doing all that contact tracing and doing test and stay with in-school close contacts.
If parents didn't opt in yet, can they still?
They can opt in. They won't be in this week's distribution. The opt-in form has been shut off, so if people want to opt in at this point, they should notify their school principal.
Bob, when will the 59 6th graders, do we know a time frame on when some of them will show up?
Some of them might have already had it, but they're not showing up in the immunization site for the state yet. So
how many do we need? You said 7 more?
yeah, 57. So yeah, eight more, and
But it also really just 8 more.
in the whole school, in the whole building.
Oh, it looks like
Yeah.
we have more opportunity
Yeah.
Right,
to get to that
right.
number quicker with the 6th.
Yeah, so
Sixth
if
grade.
all the 6th graders who had their first shot get their second shot, we'll be over 80%.
And I would challenge your I would take away the 2 decimal points, we're at 79% now, round up. 78.74 is 79 on
Mm-hmm.
So we're
Well,
close.
you know, I like to be precise.
I get it. But we're getting close.
Very close.
Can I ask, I know there wasn't health and safety this week, but next week, especially if we're close and if we get more information that we do hit that, do we, at health and safety next week, get an opinion from the Board of
Well,
Health?
absolutely.
On what they're seeing from a town-wide perspective, and if they would be supportive of us sending the request out.
Yes, yeah,
I agree, I support that.
yeah. We can definitely do that. And just for, in the schools right now, we still have some positive cases. I'll be sending out another letter tonight, but the numbers are way down compared to where we were 3 weeks ago.
So, we don't meet again for 2 weeks. Technically, we don't have to take a vote for that letter that requested to be
Right.
made. But I would ask the committee, if we get to the number and the Board of Health is supportive, do we support sending a letter up if it's next week before we meet on the 15th?
I do.
If Board of Health
Yeah.
weighs in.
Yeah.
And we're over 80. and we
Right.
have to be over 80.
We can't send it in without being over it. If we get to 80 and the Board of Health weighs in, it doesn't have strong feelings that we shouldn't do that and endorses us sending the waiver, I have no problem with sending it.
I agree.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Mr. Maloney, our superintendent's report. What do you want to start with?
Okay, well, we can call Mr. Wigan back. And he and Ms. Urquhart, Director of Student Support Services, who was unable to attend tonight, have been working on the presentation to explain circuit breaker. Circuit breaker is a challenging thing to understand, so this should be educational, informative, and helpful.
But I hope you didn't feel rushed on this. I literally asked this question just in the I hope that the impression you keep the.
No.
Okay.
No, I think both Neely and I felt like it was the right time to give you folks this information. I really have to prepare the historical information for you for budget anyways.
Okay.
And, well, we'll talk about it. You'll understand how the projections work. So again, we're going to talk about circuit breaker. Next slide. So we're going to try to explain the program for you, the ways that the circuit breaker funds can be used, the way historically they have been used in the Millis Public Schools, the historical amounts you've received, and then the projections for future years. And that was one of the key things I think I wanted to do. Next slide, please. You there? Okay. So, circuit breaker is a state program that reimburses for some of the costs. And basically there's a baseline, which for example this year is about $47,000. We're on the hook for that. Over that amount, okay, we're basically, and I think I'm getting ahead of myself and going to the next slide, but basically over that amount, circuit breaker is intended to reimburse for 75% of that amount over. And again, that base, so go to the next slide, that base is calculated to be 4 times the state average foundation. And that's an important term there. So the foundation budget, not necessarily the average cost per pupil. I think that's sometimes where people get confused. It's 4 times the average foundation cost per pupil. So it's a little different. So again, at any rate, this year it's right around 47,000, 47 and change, as I recall, 47,035 or something like that. And then over that amount, 75%. Now, something that's been new in the last couple of years, I would just add, is that in the last couple of years, transportation is also now reimbursable. It's a very new phenomenon. So, and that's good for us. It's good for all districts, but it's good for us. So next slide, please. So there you've got a formula, and that's just basically using some basic math to explain to you how the formula would work if the foundation cost was $10,000 and you had a $50,000 cost. Pretty straightforward.
So really,
Yep.
so there's a minimum threshold that we have to spend, I think, what do you say, 47,000?
Correct.
And then it's 25% of whatever is on top. of it.
Correct.
So it,
You're still on the hook for quite a bit of money. So, for example, if you were to now, let's take the $50,000 case away, that's a pretty minimal case, because I'm not quite sure I can think of an out-of-district placement that's $50,000. Okay? If you're talking about a $200,000 residential placement, okay, you're basically on the hook for the $47,000. And then if my math in my head is relatively correct, you're on the hook for another $50,000. So you're on the hook still for $100,000.
And we're on the hook for all of it that year.
Right, and you're on the hook, and that's the other thing about circuit breaker. The circuit breaker, you're always getting the reimbursement a year after it happens. So you're never, go ahead.
So how many days? Is it 180 school days? Or out of district? It's not residential.
Well, okay, that's another thing we have to be careful. It's predominantly, the cost is related to out-of-district placements because that's the biggest cost. But it's not exclusively for out-of-district placements. And I think when I get a little bit further ahead, I've actually quoted the law as far as what it can go to. So if you take X student, it would be the cost of tuition, it would be the cost of supplies, it would be cost of related services directly provided to that student. It could be the cost of a paraprofessional. It could be the cost, again, we talked about transportation is kind of a separate carve-out now, but transportation would be part of this. So there's many costs that can go into the calculation.
And I understand that. One of the reasons why I asked is we just signed a bill for a school in Randolph that is charging $661 per day.
Correct.
So if you do 180 days, that's why I asked, that's $119,880.
Yep.
And that could be a student that goes beyond 180 days. if
Yeah.
they have extended school
And
year.
so using that,
Right.
so let's just use 180 days. I
Yeah.
know it can go beyond, but let's use 180. It's 120,000. How much is this, how much are we on the hook for, and how much could the state reimburse us?
You're on the hook for, well, without
And I
getting
know
out,
there's transportation, but let's
without
just.
getting out a calculator, you're on the hook for 47,000, that, right away, okay? Then you're on the hook for 25% rather, of the balance between the 47,000 and the 120,000. And you've got your phone out there, so maybe you can run it.
So wait, so we take out the, I used to do this on paper, now I'm looking at it so sadly.
I know. I'm
I
just
have a
bad.
calculator on this, I don't know if you know that.
You're right,
So 119,880 minus
47.
47. That's 72,880.
Okay, so you would be on the hook for 25% of that,
So I would do times
right?
0.25,
That is correct.
18,220.
That is correct.
plus
Plus
47.
Plus
47, yeah.
Everyone stop screaming. 47.
Did you get the 47?
No, I'm adding
Okay.
65,000.
Correct.
And I know we have to provide this, and I'm not saying anything about the cost, it's just that the amount of money coming in versus the amount of money that
Yep.
formulas
Well, and that's
doesn't
always,
necessarily work to our advantage.
that's always been one of the criticisms. Now, again, I'm old enough to remember when there was nothing. And that's how circuit breaker in not only Massachusetts, but in many states got started. One of the famous cases was a brainstem case in New Hampshire. And it was a little district that had like 300 voters, and they refused to pay the bill. But that's also how the circuit breaker version of got started in New Hampshire, later in Massachusetts, and in other places. Isn't that they didn't want to provide services for the child, but the services were going to be $500,000.
And you're right, though, because it's not just autism.
Yeah, there's lots of different things that come into it.
So the 47 is 4 times the state average. That's the number you're talking.
Foundation,
Yeah, of the foundation.
a foundation. And
4
again,
times the state average foundation budget. That's the 47 number.
right,
Okay.
the current one. And it'll go, like everything else, it goes up a little bit every year. I think this year, or excuse me, last year it was around 45. So. And again, a lot of times, can you go to the next slide, Bob, please? So I think a lot of times we do talk about it without a district, because that's the biggest expense. The single biggest expense that any child will potentially have is if they are an out-of-district placement. And the out-of-district placements, generally speaking, a relatively inexpensive out-of-district placement is in the $50,000 to $60,000 range. And a major out-of-district placement will be anywhere from $220,000 to $500,000.
But on some of those residential, which we get reimbursed, or we don't pay for those.
Yeah, you pay for them.
I thought on the first slide it said we don't pay for residential.
You pay, well, it depends on the residential.
For students placed outside of their homes, towns, by the Department of Children.
Right, by DCF.
Cost share.
By DCF, by
All costs are
DCF,
reimbursed.
right, by DCF, the placement by DCF would be a cost share. Okay? Likewise, there are situations where Department of Mental Health is supposed to cost share on certain students.
So we would still have to pay that
We would-
$47,000.
Yeah, and in those situations where there's a cost share, what's really supposed to happen is we're supposed to pay the educational portion. And they're supposed to pay the residential portion. I will tell you, it's not as simple as saying that. I would say it's fair to say that we have regular, and I say we, school districts, have regular fights with state agencies over that issue.
And that number is not regulated by the state?
It is in law. To say it's regulated is to say, again, when I say we're fighting with them, we're fighting with the regulators. So,
No, because I'm saying, are they saying you could, and I just throw it randomly,
Yeah.
you could charge $750 a day for residential, the residential fee. Is that number set?
that number is regulated by the state. So what will happen is an out-of-district agency, let's call them, okay, will submit every year a request to set its tuition. It'll set a request for a general increase, and then it will set specific pieces of that, okay? So yes, that is regulated, and depending on what they're asking for, okay, the state will actually come down and say, no, you're not going to get a 10% increase. That's just not going to happen. Okay, which is why typically we budget 4%, because the state's pretty good about trying to hold the line on some of these things. Now, again, it depends on the year. Like anything else, these places are hit by inflation and a number of other factors. So all of that goes into the consideration by the agency that regulates, those price increases.
Thanks.
So if we skip to the next one, payments are made 4 times a year. And they're pretty good about that. On occasion, the June payment is made like July 1st or 2nd. It's still credited to the previous fiscal year, so It's not a problem either for us locally or for the state, but for their cash flow standpoint, it sometimes works out that way. And again, there are always payments that are related to costs incurred in the previous year. Now, in the current year, you have to spend all that money. You can't save it. It would be nice if you could, against a rainy day for, unexpected expenses, but you can't save circuit breaker. Next slide, please. So, this is I think where I was getting ahead of myself a little bit. So circuit breaker can be used for costs directly attributable, and this is quote right out of the law, to providing special education services on a student's individual education plan. And notice it's talking only about the IEP. We talk about section 504s, that's a different law. It does not apply here. The circuit breaker has no relationship to 504. So salaries can be applied for both the educational personnel and related services, any specialized books, specialized material, or equipment. Now, it has to be specialized. So that we might distribute a laptop to a student does not make it specialized. Okay? That we may distribute a specialized laptop for a visually impaired student, that's what makes it specialized. Okay? Tuition costs we've talked about. Consultant costs if they're directly attributable to the IEP. Extended day costs if they're called for in the IEP. And then group costs are prorated. So a lot of times what will happen is you'll have a student that, whether they are in a day placement or they're in a program here, they may have related services when they're doing them in a group. So what you have to do is take the cost for that group and you have to allocate it among all the students in the group. So you can't count, that hour's time of, let's say, a speech consultant.
So I have a quick question, Carrie. What if a kid opts to go to like Tri-County? Does the tuition for that count?
If it's specified in the IEP,
So
it's very tricky on that because it's a public school setting. But
Right.
public schools are legitimate tuition
Right.
that can be counted as an out-of-district tuition for the purposes of special education and for circuit breaker. But it would have to be called for in the IEP.
Okay.
And that would be rare.
Yeah.
That would be very rare.
Okay.
But
Just curious.
you never know. I mean, stranger things have happened.
Sure.
I've never seen that one happen, but it doesn't mean it's impossible.
Sure.
So, historically, the way we do is we look at all possible costs to maximize the revenue from circuit breaker, but our expenditures that we use it for are almost always out of district tuition. I don't think we've really ever used it for anything else. Next slide, please. So this is a bar chart you've seen before. In fact, you saw it last year because it was in your budget book. And this shows you the circuit breaker from 2014 through 2021 fiscal year. And you will see back in 2014, it was 171,803, I think it is, that we received. Maybe it's 603. And then in 21, we received 360,642. That's the number we're working on this year. So that 360, we're receiving this year and spending it. You'll also notice this kind of a cycle. Started low, went up in FY17, then it came back down, then it went back up. And the reason I'm pointing that out to you, that's going to become important when we go into projections. So, the next slide. So FY22, the year we're in, based on what we know right now, it looks like what we're going to probably end up claiming for, but we don't know this. This is still an estimate. I should have put estimate next to it. We'll probably be claiming somewhere around $392,000 for the actual tuition or the actual circuit breaker claims. and then probably another $30,000 in transportation. And you'll notice I've kept the transportation level. The transportation is very variable. So rather than try to pretend that I knew how transportation was going to vary, I just kept it as a level number throughout. In '23, because of what has happened this year, I think that we may go up over $500,000. However, that's a one-time happening. I then see it starting to come back down. Now, it could come back down in a sharper decline than that. And there would be two reasons that it could come down in a sharper decline. One could be that there are students that are going to be aging out or moving out that I don't know about. The other is that we're starting to develop some internal programs, and when we have things like transition, when we have things like the SEL program upstairs, they're very good for our students. They're very effective for our students. They're the right thing to do, and they do save us money, okay? But it also does mean circuit breaker's gonna go down. So, and that's okay, that's a good thing, because circuit breaker, as we just talked about, circuit breaker is never gonna make you whole, all right? So again, the idea is we wanna focus on doing the right thing, because it's not like circuit breaker is a way to make money. Circuit breaker is a way to help you out, but it's not a way to make money, nor should it ever be thought of that way. And the way I came up with those estimates is I went back to those previous years, and I looked at that cycle. And that cycle had a very common 9% movement. And I said, well, you know what? You know, it's a statistical exercise. And one of the things you do with statistical exercises, you say, well, how has it worked in the past? Well, that's how it's worked in the past.
Is the second FY '23 supposed to be FY '24, and is the last one supposed to be FY '25?
Nope.
So why? Are
Oh,
they
I'm sorry. Yes, it is. You're talking on the very left-hand side.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
Okay,
20
I only asked because I didn't know if you presented two FY '23.
No.
Okay,
You're right.
all right. No, that's fine.
And part of that is because you're always talking about, this is the year that you're getting it, but it's based on another year. Yeah. So yes, you're right. Good catch.
Terry, do you, if you don't have this number, I should have asked this ahead of time. What percentage of this circuit breaker, meaning what is it on average to the total cost that we're spending on SPED, which I know has been a difficult exercise in the past?
I will get out my phone for you.
Are you making a call, or are you?
I'm calling a friend, right. That's what I'm
Another
doing.
friend.
No, I can tell you right now for this year.
So you're gonna give us a total cost of SPED, special education, both in district and out of district?
Circuit breaker covers about 25% of your tuitions. Does that answer your question?
No, my question is, what is the whole budget?
For special education.
Yes.
The whole budget for special education, I've done this before, and we do it for different reports or whatever, it's probably in the vicinity of approximately, and the 25% figure may still be a good number, it's probably in the vicinity of $4 million.
Okay.
Maybe a little
So
bit more
if we
now.
were Roughly $17 million last
Yeah, we have a
year.
$17 million
So we're
budget, so it's,
talking
it may even be up to
18%.
$4.5 million now.
So 17 to.
Yeah.
17+% of our overall budget.
Yeah.
In some years, it could be up to 20, right?
Some years it could be up to 20.
And of that, so the 4 million, right, let's just assume in FY '23, we're only getting $569,000.
Yeah. And again, the number I was giving you was actually related just to tuition. The 25% is, it covers 25% of your tuition costs.
Right, but you gave us that
Yeah.
that 4 million is total.
The four, and I would say, I actually haven't looked at it. The 4 million number is really kind of based on last year. It probably is up around 4.5 million this year. Because this is the first year we've had the transition program, so that would be an add. We've added the SEL program. So yeah, it's probably up around 4.5 million this year. Actually, it's a really good question, and as we prepare your FY23 budget, I think maybe that's something we'll take a look at trying to provide that in that budget.
And the other reason why I was asking that is because it would be interesting to be able to do the bar charts where you show where the total cost is and what the circuit breaker actually pays for. And there's a lot of distance between the total cost and
We
what
could-
we're getting back.
We can probably do something like that. I think we can do something like that.
It doesn't have to be in a double thing, but just the point of how much we're getting versus how much we're spending.
Yeah, I get some very talented staff. I'm sure they can figure it out for me if I can't.
Google it too.
Yeah, there we go.
Steve will come in.
We can use the Google.
Yeah.
We could use the Google.
The Google machine works.
Other questions here, other than the fact I made a typo or two?
I'm sorry, Terry,
No, it's a good catch. I'm glad you caught it, because we'll fix it.
Mr. Conrad.
I think this is what you said, but I just wanted to confirm. So like, with the transition program and the things that we're doing that we bring in-house, we are counting those expenses towards what we submit in
Yes.
order to get our revenue.
Yeah, so let me talk a little bit about that, and actually, the student services folks do the actual filing, so they would know better than I. But I've been around long enough that I know pretty much what it is. You basically, when you're getting ready to file for circuit breaker every year, you really take a look at every student, and there's some students that you can obviously immediately say, all right, this student is enrolled in regular, classrooms with some support at the high school. They're never going to qualify. Okay, so we're not going to look at that student. Then you will look at students who are in a program, let's say like SEL, and maybe they have a paraprofessional, and maybe they have some related services, and you start saying, all right, well, maybe I want to take that student and I want to look at that student and I want to do the math, because even if it's $1,000 more, I want to file for that $1,000, all right? I want to get that $750. And then there are other students, obviously, our folks are out-of-district folks, where you kind of know from the get-go, we're going to file on those kids, okay? And the same goes with transportation. We have kids that we transport here in district, for the most part, they're not going to be covered under the transportation clause unless some very strange things they got a whole bunch of other stuff. But the out-of-district kids, in all likelihood, particularly if they are at a distant out-of-district day placement, there's a good likelihood we're going to be able to file for the transportation reimbursement on them as well. So and we're lucky. We have some experienced people. They've been doing it a long time. They don't miss much. Well, they don't miss much. They don't miss anything. Because I've gone through their paperwork, and I'll be honest with you, first couple of years here I was a little nervous, because, it's new, and the paperwork they submit is excellent. I would trust them implicitly.
With the budget, with the kind of like the data that Steve was mentioning, could you also include, not necessarily in a chart, but just in a footnote of basically how much we as a district are going to have to spend before circuit breaker kicks in? So maybe it's 3 million, something, whatever it is. I think it's important to know that, so people look at our budget, and if we're saying we're 17 million and we got 4.5 million in sped costs, and we're getting circuit breaker, I think another piece of this is to be able to say, we're on the hook for 3 million before circuit breaker even is
Okay.
in the conversation.
got it, in aggregate.
Yeah.
An
yeah,
aggregate number.
In aggregate.
Yeah.
I just think externally, you know, again, people look at a $17 million budget and then they start looking at the big numbers in there and they start asking questions and what can you do and where, you know, the reality is there's nothing we can do about this number ever, and you know, the way circuit breaker works, I mean, that 4 times the foundation number is not an insignificant factor.
No, and again, a great example is if you have let's say you have a $100,000 staff member, okay? And I'm just making up numbers, okay? Well, if they have a 20-student caseload, and that actually can be on the low side, you have to allocate that number out. So that's only $5,000 per student. Well, you got to get to $47,000. So, you know, you're never going to get there. You know, essentially, if that student is here in your school, which is what you want, that's the best way to educate them.
Yep.
Is right here. You know, whether it's in this building or that building, that's the best place to educate them. So yeah, so you're right. I think it's a good number to have. I think we can come up with that. Other questions before we move off of this slide? Because this is probably okay. All right. So there are some concerns about estimates, and obviously the first one is statistical. I've mentioned that it doesn't account for move-ins, move-outs. It doesn't account for new programming, which is something we want to encourage. We don't want to discourage. And it doesn't account for a state budget shortfall. The state in recent years has been really good about funding at 75%. But for probably the first, 20 years of my career, they were not so good. And I can remember it being as low as 60%. And we kind of felt ourselves really lucky if we got it 72%. The past 6 years or so, they've been pretty consistently at 75%. And as I say, transportation's been a new add in the last 2 years. So funding has been pretty solid in circuit breaker recently, but it hasn't always been. And, if you don't understand your history, you're doomed to repeat it. So I always caution people that I know what has happened in the past, and if things get difficult, this is a place where they will sometimes go to take money. Because there's, several millions of dollars sitting in this fund. I don't expect that to happen, but it's possible. And on that, any other questions you might have? Okay.
Mr. Wigan, you think you might want to, since we're on special education, do the stabilization fund now?
Sure, let's do the stabilization fund. So I wrote you a memo, I think. I wrote you a memo. Did I write you a memo?
Yeah.
I always write you a memo. I wrote you a memo on the idea of a stabilization fund. And the language I got was actually language from another community that successfully created a stabilization fund. So typically what happens is this is the sort of the language that goes on the warrant, and then it's moved, and there is some funding that is given to it that when it's actually moved. And then it is funded on a regular basis by some mechanism. This particular community, I thought, did a very interesting thing, which appealed to me, in that they use Medicaid reimbursement funds to fund this article. I say that was intriguing to me is because Medicaid reimbursement funds don't come to us. They go to the town. So don't get me wrong, I'm not complaining, but we do the work for the Medicaid funds. We do not see the benefit of the Medicaid funds per se directly. And so that would be an interesting way to take some of the Medicaid reimbursement to use it to build this up gradually over time. You cannot have more than 2% of your budget ultimately in a stabilization fund. Right now, based on where we would anticipate the FY23 budget being, that would be $357,000. We're certainly not, we would never be asking for that in one fell swoop. We would be looking to gradually build to that, you know, and then have it sit there, and then, you know, the idea is if you get, you know, a student that moves into your district, okay, that is going to be an out-of-district residential placement, you know, at $200,000 that we didn't budget for, or, you know, multiple other day placements that all of a sudden develop either internally or externally, that's what the fund is for, okay? You know, it would basically help, you know, deal with situations like what we're running up against right now. So, I'm suggesting it would be nice if we could start it off at $25,000 and maybe contribute $25,000 a year. If it was even a smaller rate, I think it's just, I think savings is good. I think it's always good to have a savings account. And I believe in capital reserve funds for equipment, for towns. I believe, you know, whatever you can save for, save for. And this is just one other thing. So I'm not making a recommendation at this point. I just wanted to bring the language before you to think about. We've talked about it before. This happens to be a year where it would really have helped us.
I have a recommendation. I support this, and I think this is the right way to go. It shows that we're trying to be thoughtful about unanticipated costs that will come on. I think we bring this up when we start the tri-board meetings again in the fall, and then we can pull together some real data. Because that has been a discussion at the board level, that we can talk about fund, what's the term that
Unfunded mandates?
unfunded mandates. Right? He wasn't the only one to do that. So I like this. We're not gonna act on it this fiscal year, obviously, but we can bring it up as we roll it and try for next September or October. Unless there's a compelling reason to start out with the ahead of that.
And I'll take 30 seconds just to say that if the federal government had ever fully funded 94-142, which became IDEA, at the 40% of the average cost per student in this country, not only the people of Millis, but people of every community in the United States would have far lower taxes simply based on the funding of special education. Okay, I got off my soapbox.
That's fine.
Did the vehicle inventory with the.
Yeah, you'd asked for a vehicle inventory, and this is our latest one. I will tell you that the only thing, and of course it's really easy to read, the only thing,
It is on my screen.
Yeah, the computer can zoom in.
the only
Wanna
thing
see?
that is really, we need to update is you have 4 items that are basically done by clock hours, not by mileage. That would be the John Deere loader, the Skag, and Dixie. Actually, I think there's 3 mowers. I think the X-Mark is a mower too. But those are all done on hours. The X-Mark being the newest mower that was bought with the Clyde Brown project. And I think those hours are off. John thinks they're off too, but we just haven't had a chance to get back and verify those hours. And with the John Deere, it's so old, we're concerned that maybe there was just some years that the hours just weren't recorded. So we're trying to hunt that down a little bit. You will also see that in the past, we've had this list, and we had the information essentially up to where it says funding source. We did not have the information to the right of that. That's all been added now. And so what we're trying to do is give some information about, you know, what a standard depreciation is, how many years over depreciation it is, and then approximate years where I would start a lease. And in virtually every vehicle, that we would propose to replace at some time or other, we talk about a 3 to 5 year lease to replace them. If it's a 5-year lease, of course, it has to go on a town warrant. But if it's a 3-year lease, it's something that, depending on the budget on any given year, this committee, or obviously its successors, could consider.
So, maybe you're doing it through the capital appreciation, but what would be helpful, if possible, is to the right, or a note somewhere, to the right of the miles. Like, for instance, let's use Dodge Caravan.
Yep.
And I know each vehicle is a little bit different, but how many miles should we be putting on our Dodge Caravans?
Yeah, I can work that in.
And maybe those numbers change as vehicles get better. So maybe the 2012 vehicle, you know, the 2022 vehicle we get, the two that we just approved, maybe they last longer. Meaning,
Yep.
so only because I think what you're gonna see is we are over on pretty much everything.
Oh, we are.
And I would even use that this is where it came up from the tractors. Like, we're at, even though they're off, let's just say 1543, it may be 750 hours for that tractor, or whatever it is, if
Yep.
we're doubling it. And I'm just throwing that out there.
Right.
But that would be helpful to gauge, and this is the exercise we like to do, Mark. Maybe Denise was there too, when we started to try to figure out whether it was miles or years, but just to get on a way to replenish them.
We can,
If you could do that, and if the numbers are, if you can't do it, then don't add it, just add it.
no, I think we can do it, and I'm spacing now, I'm coming up with means, and I know that's not right, because that's the building group, the Blue Book folks. They will have an independent assessment of how many miles any given vehicle should be good for.
Do they do it by usage, meaning a family use of a Grand Caravan is different than?
I don't know, it's a good question, I can research it with
I
them.
have two good questions, please let Jamie, please.
Yeah.
Make sure that the notes are,
Probably not, because for the most part, I think their thinking is, an engine's an engine.
and that's true.
And, if it's gonna be good for 75,000 miles, it doesn't really matter the 75,000 miles unless you're taking, your Toyota Corolla, every day up Pikes Peak. And that might be different.
This is helpful, thank you.
And, okay, we done?
Thanks, Terry.
Thank you,
Alrighty.
Terry.
Terry. Yeah, executive session.
All right, we will now adjourn to executive session.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Conroy.
I make a motion that we adjourn to executive session for the purpose of contract negotiations for union and non-union personnel, not to return to open session.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is this a roll call vote or a roll call vote?
Yes.
Ms. Roach,
Yes.
Mr. Conroy.
Yes.
I am a yes.